Check out how tiny this lens is. What I have in my hand right now is the Sony FE PZ 16-35 f4 lens. So PZ, if you're unfamiliar, stands for power zoom, and even though this is not the first Sony PZ lens that it has produced, it really does stand out quite different from the rest of the other power zoom lenses that came before it. Let's dive right into the review. Hey, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to another Tech 360 review, and today we are taking a look at this lens that I have in my hand right now. Like I mentioned, it is the Sony FE Power Zoom 16-35 f4 lens. So power zoom, what does it stand for? So conventional lenses can zoom if they do have that function, and you just have to roll the zoom ring and it can zoom in and out as you will manually. However, this lens has a very unique function, very unique couple of functions that I'll go through in a bit. One in particular about this lens is the zoom lever right here. So you can get that smooth, buttery zooming in and out motion of that lens, of that frame with this lens. So the lens relies on a couple of internal motors, particularly the XD linear motors, which makes this lens separate itself from its predecessors that came before it. So some of its predecessors, the power zoom lens line has been made for APS-C as well as full frame camera. So for this particular lens, it is made for full frame camera, so you can use it for APS-C frame cameras as well as full frame and not worry about getting vignetting around the sides. So like I mentioned before, this is the world's lightest wide angle lens right now in the market, and look at it comparing to the size of my palm. I want to say it's almost 3/4 the size of my palm, and it's really lightweight and small. So without further ado, let's jump right into the design aspects of this lens. In terms of the design of this lens, it's really quite simple. You do get a lens hood which snaps on quite nicely, but one of the striking features when you pick up this lens, I think you will notice, is that it has 3 different rings. So what do the rings do? You have your focus ring as usual, zoom ring at the bottom of it with the inclusion of something quite unconventional, the aperture ring, which is really nice, and I really enjoy using lenses that have this, because for me, I personally don't like to go into the menu system to switch the apertures. Everything is right on the lens, which makes it really fast and simple to do. Speaking of the aperture ring, you do have the option of having it clicked on or off with the switch right here. So if you have it on, what it does is that the lens actually locks onto the different apertures, and there's quite a really nice click to it. On the side, you have your zoom lever, which is one of the options that you can choose to have the lens zoom, or you can also control it via the zoom ring. And at the bottom, you have a focus hold button, which is customizable within the camera menu system. And obviously, you have your autofocus and manual focus switch. Looking at the other side of the lens, iris lock, which is quite handy, I have to say. And as I mentioned before, the click for the aperture ring. So this lens itself has 12 groups and 13 elements. That's a lot of things going on in this lens, and a lot of functions, a lot of different glass within this lens to help you correct, to help you get rid of those chromatic aberrations that you would typically see in other lenses of this size. In terms of filter thread, the filter thread of this lens is 72 mm, and the minimum focus distance for wide angle when you're shooting it on 16 mm is 0.28 meters, and when you're shooting it on 35 mm, it'll be 0.24 meters. A lens of this size, there's so many functions and interesting features going on. Is it weather resistant? Yes, it is dust and moisture proof, which makes it really handy and reliable when you're using it in tough conditions. Not like this today, it's really hot out, but if you're shooting it in weather conditions where it's rainy, or when you're maybe in the desert where there's a lot of dust, this lens can definitely hold up to that. And I always appreciate when a lens is weather resistant, so I don't have to worry about it breaking down as such. In terms of bokeh, 7-blade aperture ring, circular aperture blades, so you get that smooth and circular bokeh. So we'll be testing out the bokeh and see how it does in terms of autofocus with this lens later on in the real world test. For the lens has quite a number of different ways that you can control the zoom. First being your zoom ring, like all other lenses out there that has the zoom function, as well as the zoom lever, which is quite interesting. So the speed of the zoom lever or the zoom is controlled by how far you push the lever down or upwards. And if you don't prefer to control the zoom lens within the ring, if let's say you have a gimbal setup and stuff like that, you can also choose to select to customize the zoom function within select camera bodies. So as of the recording of this video, you can do it on the Alpha 1, the A7S III, the A7 IV, which I've been using to test this lens out, the FX3 as well as the Sony ZV-E10. So speaking of the assignable functions and dials within the camera settings, how do you control the zoom speeds? Because on the lever itself, you can choose to move it up or down, which basically controls the speed. And if you're turning the zoom down really quickly, and then you obviously get a faster zoom. But if you're doing it within the camera menu system, is there a possibility of doing that? Yes. So within the camera system, you can select up to 8 different steps of speeds for your zoom. And you can also do that from standby mode as well as recording. I'll show you guys in a little bit about what I'm talking about. Like I mentioned before, this lens is really tiny and small. And one of the interesting features is that the zoom is not external. Everything is happening internally in the lens. And with that being said, it controls the barrel length as well as the weight. And I guess this will be really handy for people that are constantly shooting on gimbals like myself, so I don't have to always rebalance the lens if I'm deciding to shoot it at a different focal length. So in terms of the zoom motors, the lens uses XD linear motors, which Sony has mentioned to me is supposedly very quiet and it has really smooth operation, so we'll test it out later in a bit. Other than that, the lens has full autofocus capabilities even when you're zooming in and out. If you decide to do like different camera techniques, in-camera techniques when you're zooming, you can feel free to know that the autofocus is definitely going to be locked on. Also, Sony has mentioned to me, so we'll test that out in a bit. Other than that, up to 30 frames per second still shooting, which is also supported, and I believe now only the Sony Alpha 1 is able to do that. But other than that, one thing to point out is that even though this lens is sort of catered towards videographers, there's no internal image stabilization in this lens. So I'm just going to be testing the focus breathing of this lens right now. According to the spec sheets of the lens, the focus breathing shouldn't be that obvious. And actually, I'm just looking at it right now, so I'm focusing between that bridge over at the end to the leaf that's really close. I'll do a couple more tests later, but just looking at the footage right now and just zooming in and out, not zooming, focusing in and out, there's barely even any breathing at all. So if you're unfamiliar with what focus breathing is that some lenses, they have this characteristic to the lens. When you're focusing from something near to far, it zooms in and out very, very slightly, and you can see there's just this slight zooming in and out of the lens. But some people find it unappealing, and some people do find it appealing, because with a lot of other vintage cinema lenses out there, there's actually this really intense focus breathing for some lenses, and a lot of cinematographers still use it. But if you're one of those guys that prefer not to have focus breathing, this lens doesn't have it at all. I can't see any focus breathing at all. In the previous test that I was doing, focusing from the leaf to the bridge, I was shooting at quite a closed down aperture because it was quite bright out, but now I have an ND filter on and I'm trying to see if the focus breathing is more apparent when I'm shooting at F4, which is the maximum aperture. So I have my model here standing right in front of the frame. Let's try to get her as close as possible to see if, how good the focus will do. Okay, so now I'm just gonna demonstrate what it will look like at F4. Zooming, focusing from her to the bridge, and then we'll review the footage in a bit. Okay, so I'm just looking at the frame. I think it's actually almost the same as what we did just now. I don't really see any intense focus breathing. So just take note at the edges of the frame, if you can see like things coming in and out of the frames with a very minimal zooming in and out, that's where focus breathing is, on like how do you tell if a lens has focus breathing. Alright, so I'm just reviewing the footage that I got just now, and obviously this is a 5-inch monitor, so it's not the best for reviewing in full resolution because I shot it in 4K. So you guys at home will have a better understanding and a more apparent result of whether the focus breathing is obvious or not. But I'm just looking at the screen right now and it's barely any focus breathing at all, which is very impressive for this lens. And yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next real world test and see how this lens performs. So we just got done shooting some B-roll of my model walking around with the zoom function and testing whether the autofocus will lock onto her eye. Safe to say it really does, and it's really quite accurate. I don't think there was a point in time during the shoot. I was using a gimbal to test the smooth motion as well. I don't think there was any point in time when I was shooting the B-roll that the autofocus did not lock onto her eye. So that's safe to say. But what I want to demonstrate now to you is to also show you the different speeds that you can use and the different settings you can do in order to change the different speeds in terms of the zoom. So let's just go ahead. I have this frame right here set up of the bridge. I'm just going to roll. So first I'm going to show you using the zoom ring. So one thing I noticed right off the bat is that using the zoom ring while you're rolling or in standby mode, there is quite a little bit of lag. I'm doing it quite fast now. There's quite a little bit of lag when I'm zooming in and out. I would say that it's not as responsive as we would use on a manual zoom lens, but let's try and see if the zoom lever is as responsive. Okay, the zoom lever is slightly better, so when I'm zooming in, when I stop, the frame does stop, and I'm zooming out as well. And you can control the different speeds by how far back or front you push the lever, so I'm just doing it really slowly now to get you guys a wide shot. And then we can slowly zoom in, and as I'm panning around, I think just looking at the screen right now, the autofocus seems to be locked on. But if you decide not to use this, I've also set the custom menu buttons for my zoom, so I've set it to C3 and C1. So let's just find a different frame and I'll show you guys how that works right now. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right into the menu system to show you guys how you can customize the button dials in order to zoom in and out. So all you have to do is go under dial customize, and you even have different settings for if you're shooting stills or video. And since we're shooting video now, let's just go in. I've already set the different functions, so I'm just going to show you guys how it works. So for my C1 button, that is the zoom operation for telephoto, and under here you can even select your fixed speed, recording or standby, which I've already done that. So I've done the zoom as well as zoom out for C1 and C3. So I'll show you guys what it looks like now. So just zooming in, I can press the button. This comes in really handy because if you're operating the camera, you don't have to use your left hand. You can just use this. You can use your right hand if you're shooting this way, and you can focus on just getting your shot right. So I've set the C2 button to choose the different recording speeds. So you can choose up to 8 steps like I mentioned before just now. I'm just showing you guys how fast this is. So let's just record it. I'm going to zoom in. It's actually really quick. And let's see what the slower setting would look like. So I'm just going to go all the way to number 1 and hit roll. Oops, sorry. Okay, let's do that again. And this is how slow it's so slow. It just looks like the frame is not really moving. Yeah, this is way too slow, but I guess like for people that want to create suspense, this would be a great setting to use. But yeah, I normally try to keep it around 5, which is the center setting. And this zoom setting seems perfect for me. Alright, so let's review some of the footage and the images that I got. I have some photos that I transferred to my phone over the past few days, as well as what we've got just now on the camera. So I'm just let's talk a little bit about the optics and the performance from a photography standpoint. So firstly, let's look at the bokeh. So like I mentioned before, the lens has a 7-blade circular aperture, so it gives you that really nice and circle bokeh. But what are we looking out for in terms of bokeh? Sony did mention to me that there has been 12 groups, 13 elements in this lens as previously mentioned, and there's a lot of optics involved so that you can get that creamy bokeh that you are looking for in your photos. In terms of the color fringing as well as the color bleeding, the lens, well, as Sony has mentioned, the lens is made in such a way that the optics will prevent you from getting that. So let's just put that to the test and see if it's really true. So I'm just looking at the bokeh. It's really nice now, circular and really creamy. Looking at how the colors blend in perfectly from one another, there's really not much color bleeding involved, so that's good. But there's one thing that I do want to bring to your attention is that if you focus closely on the bokeh, especially in the parts where it's sort of in focus but really falling off. So I did shoot some photos of leaves around my neighborhood. If you focus on the parts of the leaves at the edges, you can see some ghosting involved. And that's quite a minimal problem. I wouldn't say that it's really a big issue, but I just wanted to point that out so that you can understand that this lens does produce some ghosting in some cases. But I'm looking at the photos that we shot today. Everything looks clear. I'm looking at the model's eyes. Everything is sharp. And yeah, other than that, I think this is a perfect lens when it comes to stills photography. So let's move on to the video aspect. When I was testing out just now, I would say that there weren't any times that the lens was out of focus. Even when zooming, the zoom was really smooth. You can change the different zoom speeds if you want to within the camera systems, like I mentioned before. Zooming in and out, using it on a gimbal and having the model walk around, the camera and lens did perfectly to lock onto the model's eyes, which is perfect. Alright, so in summary, you may be asking yourself, if you already have a 16-35 lens, would you want to pick this lens up? There are a number of reasons I would think you would find this lens useful if you're shooting video or photos. First and foremost, the size of it, the weight of it, small and lightweight. I don't think it will take up a lot of real estate in your bag. In terms of the optical performance, it does really well. I don't think I have seen any lens of this size that does not have chromatic aberration, that is sharp, nice bokeh. And yeah, everything works so well. Even the zoom is so silent. So overall, I have a lot of good things to say about this lens. As of the recording of this video, Sony has yet to release its price, so I am unable to tell you how much it is because I don't even know it myself. But all in all, very good lens. I have been very happy with the performance of it. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you found something interesting from this video to inform you of your needs if you would like to pick this lens up. And as usual, make sure you subscribe to our channel, like this video, and if you like my content, you can always subscribe to my channel or find me on Instagram at Ryan Mamba. And as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this Ryan Mamba's perspective, and I'll see you guys in the next one.